Right, Module 5, beekeeping through the ages and different types of styles of hives. So the most rudimentary way of obtaining honey is to hunt bees in a process called bee lining. When you find the bees, chop the tree down and take the honey. Obviously that's not very sustainable, so then what people started doing was they started keeping bees in skeps. Skep is that grass woven basket. The way that works is you'll have, say, 20 skeps. They're all empty excepting 3 or 4. So you have somebody sitting there, and in springtime, as soon as the swarms start emerging, they then put those swarms into the other baskets until you have all the baskets full of bees. At the end of summer, what you do is you look for the strongest colonies, you keep 3 or 4 of those, and you kill the rest and you take all the honey. That's good for strong genetics, but it's also slow start, and it's not all that efficient as a method of getting honey. It is great for lords of the manor who could then keep skeps, because they could then employ somebody to sit around as a beekeeper, but it is very labor intensive. So then the Victorians came up with in Africa and places like that, before I get on to the next one, the equivalent thing is done with logs in Africa and India, and in drier regions they have pottery things, but it's effectively the same method of keeping bees in skeps. So then the Victorians looked at this and they decided to put a bit of engineering into it, and they took some attributes that they noticed with bees, and the one attribute is that bee space. So they were able to make frames with wax on, and the bees would then you put an empty box on top of the brood with a queen excluder to stop the queen moving up. So you have just honey in the one section. So you put an empty box on that shocks them into a state of life and death, because they have to move into the highest part of the cavity to be able to overwinter. They produce lots of wax, which is a state of shock, which then encourages them to create more wax and honey. So it's a very good process for being able to generate lots of honey, but you do end up with stressed bees, which are then susceptible to diseases and pests and things. So in the last 30 years or so, 40 years, people have then looked at doing a slightly more natural way of beekeeping, and then the obvious hive that came into play was the Kenyan top bar hive that was invented by some Canadians. Again, this is a better system in that you can add one frame at a time opposed to a whole box, but it's not ideal because bees prefer to be in a vertical space opposed to a horizontal space, because, like I said, warm air rises, but they're not as stressed because you can add single frames at a time opposed to just adding huge space. So they're not as stressed, and there's a slightly more natural way of beekeeping using a top bar hive. But with a top bar hive, you can use all your conventional hardcore beekeeping systems, or you can do it as naturally as you want. So top bar hives are pretty cool. And then moving on to that, what I do is modern beekeeping, which is using a eco beehive where the main space doesn't change at all, but we can harvest honey, but it's completely self-regulating. They will determine, depending on what's happening in the environment that year, how much honey you get. So this is the next evolution in beekeeping, is modern beekeeping, and with an emphasis on the eco beehive, because at the moment the eco beehive is the only system that uses these 2 methods of honey harvesting. Right, next chapter.